Reading the Times for Sunday, February 23rd, 2020. Bernie Sanders wins Nevada caucuses, strengthening his primary lead. Senator Sanders believes in an inflexible ideological revolution that leaves out most Democrats, not to mention most Americans, Mr. Buttigieg said, adding that Mr. Sanders wanted to reorder the economy in ways most Democrats, not to mention most Americans, don't support. Further complicating matters for those hoping to stop Mr. Sanders is the diminished standing of Mr. Bloomberg, the candidate some moderates hope can defeat Mr. Sanders. Mr. Bloomberg's campaign manager, Kevin Sheekey, warned in a statement on Saturday that the Nevada results reinforce a reality that this fragmented field is putting Bernie Sanders on pace to amass an insurmountable delegate lead. He added that nominating Mr. Sanders would be a fatal error. How Bernie Sanders dominated in Nevada, while ideologically liberal voters and young people powered Mr. Sanders toward popular vote victories in Iowa and New Hampshire. Nevada's early results showed the candidate's brand of authenticity could have cross-cultural appeal, even as the campaign sparred over Medicare for all with the Culinary Workers Union, the state's largest union and one of the most powerful organizations in Democratic politics. More than anyone else in the presidential race, Mr. Sanders is showing the power of Latino voters galvanized behind a single candidate. The Sanders team has long said that California, where early voting is already underway, is a cornerstone of their campaign. How a neighbor's feud in Paradise launched an international rape case. The lawsuit claims that Mr. Nygaard used his company, Nygaard International, and employees to procure young victims and ply them with alcohol and drugs. Ken Friedman, his spokesman, denied all claims and said Mr. Bacon had spent more than a decade trying to smear Peter Nygaard by coercing women to fabricate and manufacture sordid stories about him. Mr. Nygaard also accused Mr. Bacon in a lawsuit of masterminding a conspiracy to plant a false story in the Times about sexual misconduct. Some Nygaard K employees said their boss blamed Mr. Bacon, an ardent conservationist who had accused Mr. Nygaard of illegally mining sand to create new beachfront. Trump's efforts to remove the disloyal heightens unease across his administration. At a moment when first-term presidents are typically seeking a stable team to focus on the re-election, President Trump has embarked on a systematic attempt to sweep out officials perceived to be disloyal. Supporters of Jesse K. Liu, a Trump backer who served as the United States Attorney in Washington, suspect her nomination for Undersecretary of Treasury was pulled because of dissatisfaction with her prosecution of Roger J. Stone Jr., the president's advisor convicted of obstruction and witness intimidation to protect Mr. Trump. Mr. McGuire, the acting director of national intelligence, who anchored the president by allowing intelligence officials to tell House lawmakers that Russia was already intervening in the 2020 election on Mr. Trump's behalf, was replaced by Richard Grenell, the ambassador to Germany and a vocal conservative with no background in intelligence. Same goal, different playbook. Why Russia would support Trump and Sanders. The intelligence reports provided to the House Intelligence Committee inciting Mr. Trump's ire may make the American understanding of Mr. Putin's plans sound more certain than they really are, according to intelligence officials who contributed to the assessment. Though intelligence officials have disputed that the officer who delivered the main briefing said Russia was actively aiding the president's re-election, people in the room said that intelligence officers' responses to lawmakers' follow-up questions made clear that Russia was trying to get Mr. Trump re-elected. Now, American intelligence agencies face a new question. How do they run such operations and warn Congress and Americans at a moment when the president is declaring that the intelligence on Russian election meddling is another misinformation campaign that is launched by the Democrats in Congress? War in a petri dish, how a coronavirus ravaged a cruise ship. The captain came over the intercom early in the evening. A passenger who had left the ship 9 days earlier had tested positive for the new coronavirus sweeping through China. After American passengers raised concerns with the embassy, an official at the Center for Disease Control and Prevention wrote that there was no current evidence to suggest that the virus spreads between rooms on a ship through the air handling system. The best course, the official said, was for passengers to wait out the quarantine in the rooms. A letter to American passengers said that the Department of Health and Human Services made an assessment that passengers and crew members on board are at high risk of exposure. Adapting to rising sea, schools move to the rafters and cats swim. What is happening to Miss Villarmia and her neighbors on Batasan, an island in the Philippines, is a harbinger of what residents of low-lying islands and coastal regions around the world will face as the seas rise higher. The climate refugee message is more sensational, but the more realistic narrative from the islanders themselves is adaptation rather than a mass migration, said Laris Jamero, who has researched the Tubigan Islands for 5 years and runs the climate and disaster risk assessment efforts at the Manila Observatory, a research institute. On Ubay, an island of 160 residents, that is 20 minutes by boat from Batasan, raised walkways connect a warren of shacks. A Mexican oil chief's hideout, sea views, and 2 golf courses. Le Zagaleta does not require its residents to share any information about their guests, not only out of respect and discretion, but also because they are entering their home, said Sergio Asconio, the estate's spokesman. Before La Zagaleta became a very discreet home for the wealthy, it was owned by Mr. Khashoggi, the Saudi billionaire, who splits his time between his estate and his luxurious yacht, the Nabila, moored in the nearby marina of Puerto Banús. In La Zagaleta's clubhouse, deer head trophies serve as a reminder that Mr. Khashoggi once enjoyed hunting on his grounds. In 2018, Cristiano Ronaldo, the Portuguese soccer star, spent a vacation in La Zagaleta, during which his partner seemed happy to ignore La Zagaleta's emphasis on discretion by posting about her horse riding activities on social media. Egyptian court acquits Mubarak's sons of illicit share trading. The 2 sons of former President Hosni Mubarak of Egypt were acquitted on Saturday of illicit share trading during the sale of a bank 4 years before the 2011 uprising that ended their father's 30-year autocratic rule. The 2, detained after the 2011 popular uprising on corruption charges, were sentenced to 3 years in jail in 2015, along with their father. Gamal Mubarak, in particular, was reviled more widely than his father during the last years of Mubarak's reign. As India's economy sags, even the Trump brand is struggling. At Trump Towers Pune, which was completed a few years ago as the first project in India to bear the Trump name, only 7 of 46 units are occupied, according to building employees and others with knowledge of occupancy and sales. In 2018, Donald Trump Jr. visited Mumbai, India's seaside business capital, to attend a glittering sales party near the construction site for the more than 75-floor Trump Tower there, a golden-hued 400-unit building where residents will have access to a private jet service. Pawandeep Singh, the managing director of 3D Realty, a wealth management company that helps sell apartments in the Trump project in Gurugram, said the Trump brand was still desirable in India, but that property prices had stagnated and international investors were staying away. Inside the Wall Street Journal, tensions rise over sick man China headline. Describing the headline as derogatory, the letter was sent on Thursday from the email account of the China Bureau Chief, Jonathan Chang, to William Lewis, the chief executive of Dow Jones and the newspaper's publisher, and Robert Thomson, the chief executive of News Corp, the Rupert Murdoch-controlled parent company of Dow Jones. Nobody in their right mind would confuse China today with China at the end of the 19th century, Mr. Platt said in an accent that, for some reason, made no sense. The letter argued that the public outrage over the headline in China was genuine and said the sick man headline should be changed online. Coronavirus spreads as new cases double in South Korea. Coronavirus spread to more countries and the numbers of new cases and deaths outside of China climbed, with special concern focused on South Korea, where the infection count doubled in a single day, raising fears that another Asian country was losing control of the escalating epidemic. On Friday, the first reported case in Busan, South Korea's second largest city, caused public libraries, horse racetracks, and facilities for senior citizens to close. The number of coronavirus cases in South Korea also set off alarms in Israel after 9 South Korean visitors tested positive for the virus upon returning home. Trump was furious that passengers with coronavirus were brought back to the U.S. Japanese officials had informed American officials that several other passengers among the 328 brought back had also tested positive for coronavirus. On Friday, American officials said that at least 34 people inside the United States have the virus, 18 of them from the Diamond Princess. The State Department is closely monitoring American citizens on board the Westerdam cruise ship in Cambodia, as well as Americans who have disembarked and are in hotels in Phnom Penh, the capital of Cambodia. A bittersweet homecoming for Egypt's Jews. Although Mr. El-Sisi paints himself as a moderate, he has done little to counteract anti-Semitism in Egyptian society, where Jews are often conflated with Israel, and where many young Egyptians know little of the country's Jewish past and how it ended. The Egyptian attitude is between ambivalent and schizophrenic, said Rabbi Andrew Baker of the American Jewish Committee, who noted that he also attended the reopening of a Cairo synagogue 10 years ago under President Hosni Mubarak, which took place in similarly veiled conditions. For many, the test of Egypt's commitment to celebrating its Jewish heritage may lie in how the renovated synagogues are used, whether they remain huddled behind armed policemen, as is currently the case, or can be open to ordinary Egyptians as a monument to a part of the culture that is as old as the pyramids. New bid to legalize abortion in Argentina, with president's backing. The abortion law is much more than the right to perform abortion, said Maria de Valstigliano, 30, a copywriter. In 2018, the president at the time, Mauricio Macri, surprised activists by allowing an abortion debate in Congress, freeing lawmakers to vote their conscience. While Mr. Macri did not support legalizing abortion, he promised not to veto the bill if passed. We are very optimistic, said Ms. MacDougall, the abortion rights activist. But we know that our strongest tool to make sure that abortion becomes legal is to take to the streets by the thousands. In LA, Los Angeles, Kobe dominates the paint. In a city where street life happens largely in cars, residents speak of their loss through art and graffiti in public places. These superstars injected the city with hope and promise. Years later, a teenage phenom named Kobe Bryant came on the scene, an enigmatic talent who would become a part of the city's life for the next 20 years. He turned purple U.S. overlooks ill asylum seekers. In January 2019, the administration introduced the Migrant Protection Protocols, or MPP, which empowered officers to return migrants south of the border to wait for the duration of their cases. As the policy returned around 60,000 migrants to Mexico. Those exemptions were largely ignored, according to immigration lawyers, American doctors in Matamoros, and the migrants themselves. Of the more than 61,097 migrants subjected to migrant protection protocols, just 263 have been granted some form of relief and entered the United States, according to data from the Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse, or TRAC. Beyond healthcare, immigration groups say MPP has also denied migrants access to lawyers. Warren Buffett praises performance, but offers no surprises in annual letter. At Berkshire Hathaway 2019 was another good year and an opportunity for its leader, Warren Buffett, to prepare his company for life without him. Operating earnings, Mr. Buffett's preferred measure of financial performance, declined slightly last year from 2018 to $24 billion. In a further show of belief in his company's value, Mr. Buffett said that Berkshire spent $5 billion buying back its own stock last year. The 3 types of people you meet at a caucus. After a number of housekeeping measures, including one in which the voters agreed to treat one another with kindness and respect, and Ms. Felder explained the formula for the party uses to determine how many votes a candidate needs to be viable, that is, to receive any delegates at all. The voting began. Clicking some buttons on her iPad, Ms. Felder then revealed the results of the early voting and added those early votes to the in-person votes, giving Mr. Sanders a total of 29, Mr. Buttigieg 15, Mr. Biden 13, and Ms. Warren 10. "This is where it gets fun," she said, after a lot of complicated math that no one seems to understand involving the early voters and their second choice preferences and the realignment of the in-person caucus voters. The final vote came in. Bernie Sanders, the Teflon candidate, faces sudden new tests. He is the big winner in the delegate-rich Super Tuesday primaries on March 3rd. "Any attempt to derail Bernie that I've seen has always blown up in the face of the derailer," said Howard Dean, the former chairman of the Democratic National Committee, who clashed with Mr. Sanders occasionally during Mr. Dean's time as a governor of Vermont. Of all of the candidates, only Tom Steyer has released an ad attacking Mr. Sanders, targeting his failure to put a price tag on his Medicare for All plan. "A lot of it is the same thing you saw happening in the Republican establishment 4 years ago," said Matt Bennett, a founder of the moderate think tank Third Way and a vocal critic of Mr. Sanders. Days before the Iowa caucuses, Democratic Majority for Israel released an ad attacking Mr. Sanders, the first time a Democratic group has run a negative campaign spot targeting Mr. Sanders by name in his 2 primary bids. One guaranteed winner in the Democratic primary plans to tax the rich. In a campaign where the leading candidates have sparred over electability and progressivity, the Democrats' tax and spending plan provide one of the most vivid illustrations of how widely their ambitions for the size of government diverge and how far the party has moved in the last 4 years towards taxing the small slice of Americans who reap the economy's largest rewards. Surveys find large majorities of voters, including a majority of Republicans, favor plans like the so-called wealth taxes proposed by Ms. Warren and Sanders, which would tax the very wealthy on the assets they hold, not just the income they earn. Ms. Warren's signature 2 cents wealth tax proposal would kick in on net worth over $15 million and would raise an estimated $3.5 trillion over a decade. All hands on deck. Health workers race to track thousands of Americans amid coronavirus. In California alone, the Department of Public Health has been monitoring more than 6,700 returning travelers from China, while health officials in Washington state have tracked about 800 and officials in Illinois more than 200. The nationwide mobilization is taking a financial toll, health officials say. Worldwide, the virus, which is known to be highly contagious, has infected 75,000 people and killed more than 2,000. All hands on deck are being pulled into this, said Dr. Marcus Plescia, the chief medical officer for the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials, a nonprofit organization that represents public health agencies across the country. If it really blows up at some point, it could overwhelm state and local health departments. Travelers' data, culled from federal customs officials, is passed on to state health agencies who farm out lists of people returning from China to local health departments. Why did the coronavirus outbreak start in China? A Chinese student in Melbourne protested in an op-ed in another paper. This virus is not Chinese. Of course, the virus isn't Chinese, even if its origin eventually is traced back to a cave in China, nor is the disease that it causes. Some of its practices are folklorish or esoteric, but even among Chinese people who don't follow them, the concept is pervasive. Why I became an activist against fear. Because I've realized it's based in fear, she told us. There were thousands of other women of faith, like myself, who felt compelled to act, to push back against fear and hate, and take a stand for love. Where we go from here and where we finally end up will be determined by whether we choose love or whether we choose fear. Why Democrats are bound for disaster. In a reprise of 4 years ago, Sanders supporters fume that the media, the Democratic National Committee, and other supposed pillars of the establishment are conspiring against him in some underhanded, corrupt way. Sanders supporters questioned the legitimacy of Hillary Clinton's victory in the Democratic primary before Clinton supporters questioned the legitimacy of Trump's victory in the general election. It's the context aggravated, if anything, for the current race for the Democratic nomination, which features a scrum of sharp-elbowed aspirants, room galore for recriminations, and the very, very real possibility of a brokered convention. Imagine that Donald Trump has almost no control over justice. In view of the intensifying controversy over the politicization of the Department of Justice under Attorney General William Barr and its potential weaponization at the hands of President Trump, it is worth reviving a proposal that has not been seriously discussed since the Watergate era. Congress should transform the Justice Department into an independent agency, legally immunized from the president's day-to-day control. If the Federal Reserve Board were subject to the wishes of a first-term president, it would be likely to lower interest rates no matter how appropriate the timing to boost economic growth in an election year and help ensure the president's victory. To an uncomfortable degree, its assessment of what the president is entitled to do as a matter of law often fits with the president's wishes. The billionaire election. Ms. dominated the night by framing Mr. Bloomberg's campaign as a bid to substitute one arrogant billionaire for another. When Mr. Sanders later confirmed his view that billionaires should not exist, one of the moderators, Chuck Dodd, asked, Mayor Bloomberg, should you exist? Mr. Bloomberg replied, I worked very hard for it, and I'm giving it away. With the debate careening between billionaires' loathing and billionaire self-love, Mr. Buttigieg warned against making voters choose between a socialist who thinks that capitalism is the root of all evil and a billionaire who thinks that money ought to be the root of all power. Do you trust a news media that sells advertisements to corporations owned by billionaires and sometimes to billionaire candidates directly to inform you properly about the level of power billionaires have and what to do about it? What part of illegal don't you understand? Last October, not one refugee was admitted, at a moment when nearly 71 million people have been forcibly displaced from their homes, the most since World War II. The Trump administration has barred asylum seekers from entering the United States to make their claim, as our laws say they're entitled to do, instead forcing them to line up for months and waiting their turn at an official port of entry on the Mexican side of the border. Out of the 29,304 people in 2019 who asked for asylum at port of entries were ordered to remain in Mexico. Were ordered to remain in Mexico and were led back into the United States months later for hearings. Just 187, that's 0.6%, won their cases. A now declassified telegram from the United States Embassy titled Violence Against Argentina Jews says anti-Semitic military commanders called people Jew dog during torture sessions. Saving scouting and the Boy Scouts. For scouting to survive, the Boy Scouts of America may have to go. After the Dykes trial, a Boy Scout spokesman said, "The actions of the man who committed these crimes do not represent the values and ideals of the Boy Scouts of America, okay? Others have always been co-ed. The Boy Scouts didn't admit girls until 2018. The Boy Scouts is by far the largest scouting organization in America, but historically, it hasn't been the only one." Why are nonprofit hospitals so highly profitable? Because nonprofit hospitals are defined as charitable institutions, they can benefit from tax-free contributions from donors and tax-free bonds from capital projects, things that for-profit hospitals cannot take advantage of. The real question surrounding nonprofit hospitals is whether the benefits to the community equal what taxpayers donate to these hospitals in the form of tax-exempt status. The judge in the case wrote that if all nonprofit hospitals operated like this, then modern nonprofit hospitals are essentially legal fictions. When black girls hear that our bodies are all wrong, that's why the lingering cultural myth that eating disorders are the province of white women isn't just misleading, it also keeps us from addressing the uniquely insidious factors that can cause black women to hate our bodies. Eating Disorders, a reference sourcebook by Raymond Lemberg and Leigh Cohn, does mention race, but only to assert that black women have more favorable body images than other women. We live in a country that loves the trappings of black culture on white bodies, but not on the bodies of those who created these looks. Even 14-year-olds who kill are not adults. Under New York law, children as young as 13 are automatically tried as adults if charged with second-degree murder and certain felony sex crimes. Adolescents tried in adult court are without important protections offered to children in family court. Spain, Germany, Greece, Switzerland, and Italy do not allow any adult prosecutions of children under 18, according to the Campaign for Youth Justice, which supports ending the adult prosecution of minors. Cripple the intelligence agencies? Not smart. On Wednesday, Mr. Trump announced that he was replacing the acting director of national intelligence, Joseph Maguire, with Richard Grenell, the ambassador to Germany. Mr. Trump tapped him to lead the office of the Director of National Intelligence last August to replace the outgoing director, Dan Coats. Mr. Trump's replacement pick, Mr. Grenell, has little intelligence experience and has never run a large bureaucracy. Student contest winners. Teenagers look at the news. Like caucuses, voters have the opportunity to choose backup candidates in case their first choice doesn't make the threshold for delegates, eliminating voters' fear of choosing the candidate they like best at the expense of wasting their vote. Through greater accessibility and greater expression of voter preference, ranked choice primaries are much more democratic than either traditional option. Voters in Maine, the first to adopt ranked choice voting statewide, have found the process easy to understand, and voter turnout has increased significantly. America's parasite. Philip Rucker wrote in the Washington Post, "As his re-election campaign intensifies, Trump is using the powers of his office to manipulate the facts and settle the score. Advisors say the president is determined to protect his associates ensnared in the expansive Russian investigation, punish the prosecutors and investigators he believes betrayed him, and convince the public that the probe was exactly as he sees it, an illegal witch hunt." As the Times reported, the president's intelligence officials warned House lawmakers in a briefing that Russia was once more intent on trespassing on our election to help Trump, intent on interfering in both the Democratic primaries and the general. A few days ago, the president replaced McGuire as acting director with Richard Grinnell, a sycophantic ambassador to Germany, whose qualifications for overseeing the nation's 17 spy agencies include being a former Fox News commentator and Trump superfan, who boasts a gold-level card with the Trump Organization. Bernie Sanders romps in Nevada. Is he unstoppable? His rivals are dividing the votes that might derail him, while what remains of the party establishment day by day proves itself irrelevant. The Democratic Party, no less than the Republican Party, looks like a derelict ship awaiting capture by a band of pirates. That's me. That's especially true if he has a clear delegate lead. I spent the early months of 2016 arguing otherwise, but the party system I was defending is pretty obviously dead. There's little stomach among party officialdom to work against a candidate who wins the most primary votes, and voters themselves are unlikely to sustain rival candidacies if they're clearly just playing for a brokered convention. Trump makes the American healthcare system even worse. Healthcare in the United States is a moral morass, a question of our soul. Uwe Reinhardt, a brilliant health economist at Princeton, wrote in Priced Out, a book recently published posthumously. Prices for virtually any healthcare product or service in the United States tend to be at least twice as high as those for comparable products or services in other countries. Reinhardt wrote, "We spend an average of more than $10,000 per person on healthcare each year, more than twice what France, Canada, and Japan each spend." In search of darkness. The lights from our home are somewhere behind me, but in front of me, there's nothing but a darkness so profound, I can't be sure where the sky meets the earth. All of these memories are from my rural childhood 50 years ago, when darkness was much more abundant, when it took over the world each night and artificial lights were so scarce they barely registered in the black expanse. My mother, as she entered old age, sold her house, moved out into the woods, to a place where revved up, lit up, modern life barely intruded at all. No sound of traffic, the night unmarred by lights of any kind. Even when I'm psychotic, I'm still me. My hallucinations can be sensory, like the brain burn, but many are auditory. I know hallucinations are coming when I hear birds speak. During the 6 months leading up to this brain fire time, I've been having milder hallucinations on and off. My hallucinations have ended, and I'm gradually returning to a lower level of medication. The Phantom of 9th Street, a bon vivant's lonely decline. The primary obstacle to bringing Mr. Pancook the aid available to many New Yorkers was his wealth, as manifested in the apartment of 9th Street. At the same time, the apartment building, a co-op, was threatening eviction proceedings against Mr. Pancook. Late in 2018, his guardian led Mr. Pancook, 70, from his apartment of 23 years to his new home. The day Frankie flew away. One gray Tuesday morning, as my husband was taking our pet parrot home from a visit to the vet, Frankie escaped and disappeared above a chaotic street corner. After a block and a half, I heard Frankie screeching. "There's a lot of birds down that way," he said. How an amputee dancer spends his Sundays. Until 3 years ago, Donald Lee had no interest in dance. Now he's an emerging force. Mr. Lee, who lost parts of his leg after a car accident more than 20 years ago, performs with and without his wheelchair for the Heidi Laksky Dance Company. He has also become outspoken on accessible artistic practices. His next lecture on the subject will be at South by Southwest Education Conference on March 10th. I usually get up around 9 o'clock on Sundays, but today I get up around 6 to rain, drops, dark, and gloom. I clean myself up and have coffee. I straighten up the house, which means folding and putting away the laundry I've done the previous day. I'm currently developing a solo piece, so I work on that. Is it too soon to write off a Michael Bloomberg? The conventional wisdom around Wednesday's night's debate gelled almost immediately, adhering as if gorilla glue to the various deficiencies of Michael R. Bloomberg's performance. He made a terrible case for himself. Elizabeth was pulverizing him. 3 of the 4 times Mr. Bloomberg has run for political office, he has cast himself as a gifted agent of crisis control. Now Mr. Bloomberg is putting himself forward to the American public as the best possible vehicle for releasing the country from the chaos of the Trump era. I was about to walk away when a woman approached the mailbox with her arms tucked to her sides. She got on her tippy toes and extended her hand until she was able to slide the letter into the slot. Let me see some money. We had Columbus's cousin in here last week. Down the block, walking away from me, a woman in a navy puffer jacket with a hood up, paused in front of a tree. The Lower East Side in 8 songs. New Yorkers may be particularly interested in a section on the Fillmore East, the hall at 2nd Avenue and East 6th Street, where from March 1968 to June 1971, Graham brought a who's who of the era's top rock, pop, and soul acts to the Lower East Side. But the Fillmore East was nothing new. It was just the latest bloom in an astonishingly fertile music neighborhood. On January 1st, 1970, he helped Graham ring in the new year at the Fillmore East with his new band of gypsies, recording songs like Changes. Before the year was out, he'd be dead of an overdose. 202 Rivington Street is a bluesy rock ballad about growing up tough but vulnerable on the streets of the Lower East Side. Drive By, Eric Bellinger, 2016. At Jump Into the Light on Orchid Street, you will wear a virtual reality headset to experience what may be the future of music. A billion-dollar scandal turns the king of manuscripts into the Madoff of France. 6 years ago, the French authorities shut down Aristotle and arrested Mr. Laritière, charging him with fraud and accusing him of orchestrating what amounts to a highbrow Ponzi scheme. I'll show you the article before November 18, 2014, the day the police raided Aristotle. Mr. Laritière said during the December interview, if Mr. Laritière hadn't infused his company with cash, Aristotle would have collapsed. He would have been instantly gone from eminence to pariah. The week in business, even billionaires can't buy debate skills. Morgan Stanley is buying E-Trade, the discount brokerage firm that allows regular people, i.e. those without tons of money, to buy and sell financial assets online. The new rule is part of Prime Minister Boris Johnson's promise to take back control of the country's borders and reduce its economy's dependence on cheap migrant labor. The stock market didn't seem too bothered by the news of more quarantines this past week. The work of a hairdresser so coveted she travels by private jet. We went back to the YMCA and she went to the childcare room while I ran upstairs and took a quick workout dance class. That was kind of cheesy, but it felt good to work my body out. 8 p.m., I took a bath, cleaned up my kitchen a little bit, edited and posted a picture on Instagram of a makeover I did, answered some DMs, and online shopped for some new shoes. 9 p.m. into bed. 10:30 a.m., I got a message for somebody who said a photo that one of my stylists posted, braids with ribbons, was cultural appropriation, and asked that I consider taking it down. 2:30 p.m. I'm scheduled to cut 2 models' hair on stage at Bayou St. Laurent. Medicare's private option is gaining popularity, and critics. We want to see equity and parity between original Medicare and Medicare Advantage plans, said Frederick Riccardi, president of Medicare Rights Center, a nonprofit advocacy group that provides counseling to Medicare enrollees. Under President Trump, some critics contend the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which administers Medicare, has become a cheerleader for Advantage plans at the expense of original Medicare. The handbook's language was revised before its final release, but communications from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services during last fall's Medicare enrollment period do appear to promote Advantage plans. And that has been Reading the Times for Sunday, February 23rd, 2020.